Hey everybody, welcome back to Barter Hordes. My name is Robert. Happy Friday. I'm running a little bit late today because I stayed up too late, woke up very late, and I decided I'd move things around a little bit today. I'm just kind of bored with everything, and so I didn't want to sit in the same chair as I always sit. So anyway, it's been an up and down week. Obviously, we're still dealing with a lot of fallout from the coronavirus and the chaos our so-called political leaders are fomenting at the moment. The National Spelling Bee has just been canceled for the end of May. That was to be expected. That's in May. But now Germany, or Munich especially, has canceled Oktoberfest already, which gives me basically, it gives me confirmation of what I was already thinking anyway, and that we're not going to have a 2020 BookTube Prize meetup in October this year. There's just no way to countenance unnecessary travel and gathering like that when this is a virtual event anyway, and we'll just have to make do with no meetup this year. We were supposed to meet up in Portland in October, excuse me. And we'll just try to reschedule for Portland the following year. There's no reason to change the location. We'll just wait a year, have a year off. So that's disappointing, but it's completely to be expected, I guess. This has been an up and down week for me reading. It's been an up and down week for me just in general. I'm getting to the end of my Sopranos binge watching. I am 3 episodes from the end. And I'm kind of sad. I don't want it to end. It's time for it to end, but I don't want it to end. I do have a couple of things in mind that I might watch next, but I'm not dead set on anything. So if you have any fantastic recommendations, please drop them in the comments. I do have HBO Now, I do have Netflix, and I do have Amazon Prime, and at least temporarily I have Disney Plus. I'm not looking to add any more on top of that. I know Hulu's got some things that I wouldn't mind seeing, but I'm just not interested in adding even more subscription services to streaming services. As far as my movie project goes, I watched 2 movies this week. In fact, I watched them on back-to-back days, and both of them happened to be from 1959. That's just the way the random generator kicked them out. The one I mentioned to you last week is Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. And I had seen that one before. I didn't remember it being in black and white, though. That surprised me, especially because the other one I watched from the same year is in color, which I'll talk about in a second. I don't remember much of the first half of the movie, the whole setup for getting them on the train to the Florida resort where they have to cross-dress and pretend to be female musicians. But I remember pretty much the Florida to the end part of it, and it's enjoyable. It would have cracked my top 5 of the ones that I've seen in my movie project if it weren't for the one that I watched the very next day, which I liked a little bit better, and it cracked the top 5. And that was Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, which I have also seen a long time ago. And I remembered that one being in black and white, and it's in color, so my memory is really not very good. But it's entertaining. It's funny to see the Alfred Hitchcock cameo in the very first scene of the movie. It's just a really entertaining spy thriller mystery story, and I enjoyed it. The one that I'm scheduled to watch next is from 1976, Network, which I also believe I have seen, but it has been many, many years. So that's what I've been watching. As far as what I've been reading, I finished 2 books this week. The first one I finished is Jonathan Coe's Middle England, which I can't really say much about because I actually am serving as a substitute judge for this round of the BookTube Prize, and that's one of the books that I have to judge. And it was the last of the 6 for me to read. Fortunately, in the group that I got pulled into, I had already read 5 of the 6, so Middle England was the only one remaining in that group for me to read. I can tell you just a little bit about what the story is. It is set roughly over the last 10 years in the David Cameron years as Conservative Prime Minister in the UK, leading up to the Brexit debacle and then after the vote into Theresa May's administration. But it's not really about the politics of the country as much as that umbrella kind of suggests. It's really about a cast of characters who live their lives in that time period and all the turmoil of the riots and the politics and the divisions in the country that we also see in the politics in the United States. And so it's kind of the Brexit run-up is the backdrop for all these individual stories. And that's all I'll say about it until after the round is over, and I can go back and talk about it a little bit more. And then the second one that I finished is a nonfiction book that is in the quarterfinals for the BookTube Prize, and that is Charged by Emily Bazelon. And this is a book about mass incarceration, the power of district attorneys, the power of prosecutors. And Bazelon uses 2 different stories to try to illustrate some of her points here. One of the stories is about a young man named Kevin. I believe he's 19 at the time he's arrested, living in Brooklyn. He gets arrested on a gun possession charge. The police showed up at an apartment in the projects, not his apartment, a friend of his named Chris, that they suspected of having guns. And the gun was on the table, and Kevin just kind of reacted and hid it in his clothing so that Chris wouldn't get in trouble. And of course, the police found the gun on Kevin, and he got arrested for a possession charge. And his story going through the court system in Brooklyn and how he was treated by a district attorney who realized that he wasn't necessarily a violent criminal, although his gun possession charge is treated as a violent crime in Brooklyn. And how they diverted him into a different program to try to give him a chance to get his life straightened out and do something with his life. In contrast to that, there's a story from Memphis, Tennessee, of a young woman who is accused of brutally stabbing her mother to death. There's a lot of DNA evidence that suggests that she wasn't the killer. They have DNA evidence of another person with her mother's blood, and it's not the daughter's blood. They don't know whose it is. But the district attorney was so set on getting a conviction, and the narrative of this young woman being such a wild child and rebellious and a troublemaker was an easy narrative to sell to a biased judge and jury, and she was convicted. And it talks about the nature of prosecutorial impunity. The power has shifted in the American court system to where the prosecutors basically can do whatever they want, legal or not, and there's almost nothing you can do to a prosecutor as a result. And so those 2 stories talk about the trends towards mass incarceration, cash bail that keeps poor people in jail simply because they can't afford to bail themselves out, and how that has flooded our jail system. And so it's a really interesting, powerful comparison between these 2 different stories. A progressive DA who saw a way of avoiding sending this young man to Rikers Island and possibly saving him, and this young woman who was innocent and had to fight for 10 years before the Tennessee Supreme Court finally overturned her conviction and ordered a new trial. But she was going to have to take the trial in front of the same biased judge. And so she ended up taking a plea deal that got her out of prison after another year or so, rather than going through the risk of another prison and another case and then having them send her to prison for another 10 or 15 more years. So she basically spent over a decade of her life in prison, very, very reminiscent of Albert Woodfox's story in Solitary. Not as long, but just as unfair. So it's an interesting book. The 2 that I'm reading now, I've started one, I'll start the other one later this weekend. The one that I'm reading now is No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, which is a book about, she doesn't really like the term, but it's often referred to as domestic violence. And she has followed in the first third of the book, which is as far as I've gotten, she has followed the story of a young family in Montana where the husband is violent repeatedly and ends up killing his children and his wife and then killing himself. And she's talking about the different law enforcement agencies, the different mental health agencies that are trying to find ways of predicting situations like this before it reaches a crisis point. And so that's as far as I've gotten in that book. She's a very good writer. I'm just struggling. For some reason, I can't read this book for longer than 30 or 40 minutes at a time. And I think it's because I've read so much social justice nonfiction recently that I'm just kind of, my nerves are frazzled about it, even though I think she's a very good writer, and it's a tremendous way of talking about this topic. The other one that I'm about to start is a novel that I don't know much about. I know it's gotten a lot of attention, and I know it's had some kind of mixed reviews. People seem to either really love it or really just don't care for it at all, and that's Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. And so that's going to be my next fiction read after I finish No Visible Bruises. And so that's what I've been reading. Not as much as I used to read each week. I've been reading one book at a time, and hitting a book like No Visible Bruises has slowed me down, where I'm not reading as many pages each day as I would like. And that's kind of been my justification in the past for reading 3 books at a time. If one starts to put me into a little bit of a mini slump, I can shift to something else to try to break me out of it. So I may try that again. I don't know. But that's where I am for right now. I hope your weekend is off to a decent start and that you're staying safe and healthy. I have a feeling we're going to be paying a big price for this impatience to reopen the country. It's a scary time, and I don't think we're anywhere near the end of it. Call me a cynic, but I think people are fooling themselves and taking monumental risks that we as a country, as a society, should not be taking right now. Just my opinion, but since it's my life too, I have a right to my opinion. I wish people would take scientists a little bit more seriously, since we clearly have a president who just thinks any cockamamie scheme that he dreams up while on Twitter would be a good way to go. Sorry for the cynicism at the end of my last couple of videos, but I'm really weary of stupid people right now. So have a good weekend. Please do what's right. Stay safe, protect your family, protect your friends, protect your loved ones. Talk to you soon. Bye.